What's up, squad? We're going to cover the posterior chain, all the exercises associated with it, and how to use the Isochain to maximize our posterior chain development. Let's get into it. Alright guys, time to get nerdy. The posterior chain is essentially the muscle groups located on the back side of the body, hence the word posterior. And it ranges from your upper back all the way to your calf muscles. So literally what you cannot see, that is your posterior chain. The primary posterior chain muscles are the glutes, including the maximus, medius, and minimus, hamstrings, breaking down into the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, and the biceps femoris, the erector spinae, including the muscles along the spine, and the calves, the gastrocnemius, and the soleus. Let's not forget the traps, the latimus dorsi, aka lats, and the rhomboids for the upper body. Now usually when we talk about posterior chain, most people will think lower body, aka a strong ass, targeting all three areas of the glutes, the hams, lower back, and the calves. The posterior chain is incredibly important, squad. It increases our power for explosive movements, it boosts our athletic performance, it prevents injuries, it counteracts unexpected forces on the muscles, that's huge, and it helps maintain posture. Each of the posterior chain muscles work independently, but they also work synergistically too, which links into the entire body's kinetic chain, and we have a video on that, and if you haven't seen it, here's a link right here. Go ahead and check that out. It's talking about the kinetic chain, the isochain, very good stuff. Posterior chain is pretty much everything when we're talking about ADL's, activities of daily living. However, sitting turns off the entire chain, and sitting too much causes major imbalances, weaknesses, and tight hip flexors, which result in a whole cascade of unfortunate lower back events, which nobody, I'm sure, wants to happen. Wants that to happen to them. Strengthening your posterior chain is going to significantly reduce the chances of a lower back injury. You gotta remember, the posterior chain is literally half of the body's muscle mass. It is that important. And each specific muscle group in that entire chain needs to be worked, guys. We don't want any weak links. Get it? Link, isochain, chain. Okay. Next point. Taking that into account with what we just learned with the posterior chain, having those muscle groups at their strongest possible contractile force is absolutely pivotal for increasing agility, lower body strength, and spinal stabilization. And the last thing we need is to be weak during any type of athletic performance or any intense movement. Anything that's going to require us to go from 0 to 100. It might not even be working out. It might be something perhaps more dire. So what exercises can we perform on the isochain that's going to help our posterior chain? Number one, right off the jump, is deadlift. The deadlift literally targets the whole posterior chain, hitting up from traps, rhomboids, lats, adductors, hamstrings, and even the abdominal muscles on the anterior. My personal favorite for deadlift variations, however, and y'all probably noticed if you've been subscribed for a while, is the Romanian deadlift. It is so good. What a stretch in the hamstring. If you haven't done that already, it is killer. Awesome for really strengthening up the hamstrings and the spinal erectors. Fantastic. The seated row, my favorite back exercise, and in my opinion, the best upper back exercise that can be performed on an isochain. Debatable, comment down below. This is probably the best possible exercise to really work the upper body of the posterior chain. The squat, specifically the back squat, as the back squat places a greater emphasis on the posterior chain muscles, hamstrings, and glutes. Of course, there's quad development there as well. Another great staple to add to our isochain work. A little bit of setup here. There's going to be a video on how to set this specific style of isometric squat up, so stay tuned for that. The lying leg curl with hooks attached to the ankles. Exercise on the isochain that's as direct on the hamstrings as this exercise. You need an extra piece of equipment, which are the hooks, so you can find that in my Amazon link down in the description below. Totally worth the money. You will feel burn in your hamstrings like never before. I mean, this is hitting all three heads of the ham. Is fantastic. Highly recommend adding the leg curl to your program if you're really looking to strengthen up your hamstrings on the Isochain, look no further. This is about as direct as you can get. Let's not forget the lower leg. Specifically speaking, the standing and seated calf raise. The seated calf raise has always been better at developing the soleus. I've found that could be debatable. Comment down below if that's your experience. And the standing one has always been great for developing the gastroc. Now, are you going to get both each time you do it? Yes, but the seated has more emphasis on the soleus and a little less on the gastroc, and vice versa. The standing still works the soleus, but it's more emphasis on the gastroc. Moving up the body now, we have the shoulder shrug. One of my favorite, literally holding the bar, no flex in the elbows, going right up into like a shrug. Great for the trapezius muscle. Just be sure not to have any forward lean with the shrug. A forward lean with the shrug is going to put your shoulders in a very awkward position. That's not going to be too comfortable. If your posterior chain has been lacking or you've noticed certain weaknesses, I highly recommend taking your posterior chain exercise a little bit more seriously, maybe altering your workout program to include more of these and have more of an emphasis on them. So instead of maybe a 1x6 or 3x6, have your posterior chain exercises be a 6x6, or if you're going for hypertrophy, have them be more on the 45-second end of things rather than the 30. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. Hopefully this is of great value to you. Let's get strong together. See you next video.